Good morning, everyone. In the previous session, we discussed about what is web client and how to develop the consumer logic by using web client. Here, web client, it is an interface, right? It is an interface introduced in the Spring 5.x version. It is an interface introduced in Spring 5.x version. It is used to send HTTP request to the server. When one application wants to communicate with the another application, then we can use this web client concept. Okay, good. Now, it is an interface that is introduced. Earlier, we have REST template, but in the REST template, it supports only synchronous communication, but this supports both synchronous communication as well as asynchronous communication. We already discussed what is a synchronous communication and asynchronous communication. Synchronous communication means after sending the request, the thread will wait for the response to continue the execution. Whereas asynchronous communication, nothing but after sending the request, thread will not wait for the response. It continue its execution. Then we develop Make My Trip application. We developed Make My Trip application using REST template and web client. So Make My Trip is acting as a consumer for the IRCTC. IRCTC API is there. It is up and running in the AWS cloud. It will take passenger data as an input and it will provide ticket data as an output. This Make My Trip and IRCTC both are communicating in the JSON format. JSON is interoperable, right? Good. Now today, we are going to learn about how to handle exceptions in the REST API. Exception handling in the REST API. So we understood both provider development as well as consumer development. So let's understand how to handle exceptions in the REST API. Exception handling in REST API. Okay. So in general, we know that in the Java, we have exception handling. Keywords are available to handle the exceptions. First of all, what is exception? Exception, nothing but unexpected and unwanted situation. Exception is nothing but an unexpected and unwanted situation, right? So when exception occurs, program will be terminated abnormally. Program will get terminated abnormally when exception occurs. Got my point? Exception, nothing but it is an unexpected and unwanted situation. Our program gets terminated normally when exception occurs. We need to handle the exception. We need to handle exception for graceful termination. We need to handle our exception properly in order to achieve graceful termination. Okay. Exception means it is an unexpected and unwanted situation. Our program gets terminated abnormally when exception occurs. We need to handle exception for program graceful termination. In Java, we have keywords. In Java, we have keywords to handle exceptions. What are those keywords available? One is a try keyword. Second one is a catch, throw, throws, and finally, keywords are available. These are standard keywords available in the Java in order to handle exceptions which are occurring in our program. Got it? So try keyword is available, catch available, throw, throws, finally like that several keywords available. What is the purpose of this try keyword? To keep the risky code. To keep risky code. Whatever the code that is having a problem, any code which is having a problem, that problematic code we are going to keep inside the try block. What is the purpose of catch block? To catch the exception. To catch the exception, we are going to use catch block. Whenever problem occurs in the try block, then it will go to catch block. So when the problem occurs in the try block, then it will go to the catch block. It is used to catch the exception. Then throw is available to rethrow the exception. To rethrow the exception, we are going to use this throw keyword. Throws to ignore exceptions, to ignore checked exceptions, we are going to use this throws keyword, right? Then what is this finally keyword? To execute logic irrespective of the exceptions. Irrespective of exceptions, then we can go for finally block. So when exception occur or the exception does not occur, it does not occur, no problem, but still finally is going to execute. For the resources closing, any resources that you open, if you want to close the resources irrespective of the exception, then we are going to use this finally block. To execute the logic irrespective of the exceptions, we will go for the finally block. So exception nothing but an unexpected and unwanted situation which occurs in our program. When exception occurs, our program gets terminated abnormally. So as a developer, we need to handle those exceptions and we need to execute our program completely. That is called graceful termination. In order to handle the exception in the Java, we are having several keywords here. What are those keywords available? Try, catch, throw, throws, and finally several keywords are available. Try is used to keep risky code in our program. So when we are writing a Java class, so the code which is having some problem, the code which runs into some problem, that code we are going to keep in the try block. Then what about the catch block? It is used to catch the exception. Whenever exception occurs in the try block, then we are going to catch that exception by using this catch block. Then throw keyword. If you want to rethrow some exception, then we will go for throw keyword. Throws. To ignore checked exceptions, we are going to use this throws keyword. Finally, it is used to execute the logic irrespective of the exceptions. All right. Now, so this is a basic exception handling concept in the Java. Now, coming to our REST API. How do we handle such kind of exceptions? Let's observe. Let me create one application, guys. New project, Spring Starter project. 31 application, Spring Boot exception. Good. So I'm using Maven as a build tool. Next, I'm using Web Starter to create this application with the DevTools. Fine. So I'm selecting only Web Starter and DevTools dependency. Click on Next and click on Finish. So let's create one simple REST API and see how it is going to work. The project is getting created. Inside this project, I'm going to create one REST controller. New class one message REST controller I'm going to create. Let us represent this as a REST controller. For that, we are using @REST controller annotation. Then let us write a method public string get some welcome message, something like this. Okay, string message is equal to some value. Then I'm going to return that message directly. So as it is a REST controller, no views will be available. Whatever that you are returning from the method, that will become direct response body @get mapping /welcome. Perfect. So our REST controller is ready. Now, let us run this application. right click, run as boot application. Currently in this application, there is no issue. So the straightforward, we are having one REST controller. Inside that REST controller, we are having one method. So let us directly access this application. Localhost colon 8080/welcome. Now we are able to access our REST controller method. Currently there is no problem in this method. So we are getting the output as expected. Good. So let me create some problem in this method. Integer I is equal to 10/0. So I'm dividing a number with the 0. When I divide a number with the 0, it will give arithmetic exception. All right. So let me run this application again and observe the behavior of our REST controller method when exception occurred in this method. So when I send a GET request, this method will be executed. In this method, wantedly, I'm creating arithmetic exception. Go here and send the request. Yes. Now if you see, our method is having a problem. Our method is having some exception. So that exception is arithmetic exception. When arithmetic exception occurs, that server is sending status code as a 500. Server is sending status code as a 500. If the status code is a 500, if the status code is a 500, if the status code is a 500, then people will think that it is a server problem, right? But if you give this exception to the client, the consumer application, they can't understand what is the problem, why this problem. Instead of giving this kind of exception stack trace, we need to give a meaningful message to the consumer application. So we developed a provider application. In the provider application, we have a REST controller. In that REST controller, we have the method. When we send the request to that method, it is having a problem. That exception stack trace is coming to the client. So it may be a consumer application. Sending exception stack trace like this is not at all recommended. So we need to convert this exception to a meaningful message, and we need to send that message to the client. Good. So in order to do that, we need to handle exception. So in the Spring Boot, exceptions we can handle in two ways. One is called local exception handling. In the WebMVC already we discussed this. One is local exception handling, and the second one is global exception handling. Local exception handling nothing but specific to particular class. It is specific to particular class. That means if you write in particular class, only it will handle the exceptions occurred in that class. Global exception handling nothing but for entire application. For entire application, the exception handling is going to work. When you go for local exception handling, it is applicable for only for that class where you implement it. For example, here arithmetic exception is coming. So in order to handle this arithmetic exception, we will be writing one method, public string handle arithmetic exception, something like this. Handle arithmetic exception. So whenever exception occurs, this method is going to execute. So here, instead of string, I'm going to take a response entity because I want to send some status code also to the client. Now, return new response entity. So exception occurred. What exception? E.get message, comma, status code. So it is a problem at the server side. So it is internal server error 500 status. So I'm writing one method. This is responsible to handle exception which occurred in our class, right? So for which exception this should execute, for that we will write a annotation exception handler value is equal to arithmetic exception. So this method is responsible to handle, or this method should execute whenever arithmetic exception occurred in our class, right? So this method, exception handler method nothing but something like a catch block. So in the normal Java, when we are using core Java programs, Whenever exception occurs in the try block, then immediately catch block will be executed. But in the Spring Boot here, whenever exception occurs in this class, whenever arithmetic exception occur in this class, then this method should execute, handle arithmetic exception. So this method is having an annotation called @exception handler. Good, fine. Let us try to execute this program. Let us try to execute this program. Yeah, dev tools available, server is restarted, clear the console, go to the browser, send a request. Now, exception stack trace is not coming, just the exception message is coming by 0. What is the reason behind that? So exception handler got executed. So here, whenever arithmetic exception occurred, our exception handler got executed. But this exception handler will execute only for particular class because it is a local exception handling. Local exception handling nothing but it is applicable for only for this class. Suppose let me create another REST controller, something like demo REST controller. In the demo REST controller, I'm going to remove this handler method. So here I'm using /demo. URL pattern should be different, right? So first method is having /welcome. Second method is having /demo. So in the first method, arithmetic exception will occur. In the second method also, arithmetic exception will occur. But where is our exception handler? Our exception handler is available only in the first controller, not in the second controller. So /welcome handler is executed and go to demo. When I go for a demo, the handler is executed or the handler is not executed, guys. For the /welcome, the handler is executed, but for the /demo, the handler is not getting executed. So can you say that currently we have implemented local exception handling mechanism specific to particular controller. So if exception occurs only in the message REST controller, if arithmetic exception occurs in this controller, then only this method will be executed. Otherwise, this method will not be executed. That is called local exception handling. That is called as local exception handling. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? Able to understand how we handle this exception here? I have a method which is mapped to get request. In that method, arithmetic exception is occurring. To handle that exception, I have written one method called exception handler method. So this method having arithmetic exception. If you want to execute this method for any type of exception, then you need to give the value as exception.class. Then exception is a super class for all the exceptions. Then this method will execute for any type of exception occurs in this particular REST control. It will execute for any type of exception which occurs in the particular REST controller. But is it going to execute when the exception occurs in the demo class? Is that exception handler is executing for the demo or it is not executing for the demo? Guys, exception handler is executing for the demo or exception handler not executing for the demo? It is not executing for the demo. Why it is not executing for the demo, guys? Why it is not executing for the demo? I want your response in the chat box. Why it is not executing for the demo? Because of local exception handling. What is the meaning of local exception handling? That is applicable for particular class. That is applicable for particular class. How to make it as a global exception handling? Yes, see here, I'm going to create one more class, app exception handler in .ashokit.exception. So app exception handler. I'm creating one Java class with a name called app exception handler. So the method which is responsible to handle the exception, remove from the controller class and keep that in the app exception handler. Now, I want to represent this as a global exception handler. For that, we will use one annotation called @REST controller advice. So in the WebMVC, we used controller advice because we want to return the UI page. But now we are developing REST controller. Whenever exception occurs, we want to execute this method and it should return some response. Handle app exception, any type of exception. Handle app exception. So in the message controller, arithmetic exception is available. Here, let me make null pointer exception. String s is equal to null s dot length. S is equal to null and s dot length. So here we are having two types of exceptions. One is message REST controller. Another one is demo REST controller. Message REST controller having arithmetic exception. Demo REST controller is having null pointer exception. Our method is responsible to handle any type of exception. Exception handler method. This method I am creating in a REST controller advice. What is the meaning of REST controller advice? REST controller advice will act as a global exception handler. REST controller advice will act as a global exception handler. What is the meaning of global exception handler? It will work for entire application. So it's not specific to any class now. In the entire application, any exception occurs. If any exception occurs in the entire application, then this method will be executed. All right. Now check this one. Localhost colon 8080/welcome. Send the request for the welcome URL. Right. Now see by 500 internal server error. When I send the request to the /welcome, the handler is executed. That's why stack trace is not coming. And if you use /demo, send the request, then still that is executed. So global exception handling is working now. /demo, it is working. And for /welcome also, it is working. So global exception handling is working in our application. Are you guys clear as of now? Exception means unexpected, unwanted situation. If it is a normal Java application, to handle the exceptions, we are going to use keywords given by Java. Try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. When you want to work with exception handling in the REST API, mainly we are using two annotations. One is called exception handler and the second one is REST controller advice. One is exception handler annotation and the second one is REST controller advice annotation. What is this exception handler? A method. That annotation will be used at the method level for which exception method should execute. We will specify that by using exception handler annotation. And what is REST controller advice? REST controller advice will represent our class as a global exception handler. So if any exception occurs in application, then this method is going to execute. Suppose here, if I specify null pointer exception, then this method will execute only for the null pointer exception. If I specify here as arithmetic exception, this method will execute only for arithmetic exception. So I want to execute this method for all types of exceptions. That's why I'm keeping as exception.class, which is a super class for all the exceptions. Which is a super class for all the exceptions. Right here, REST controller advice, it is a AOP concept, guys, aspect oriented programming. Because so initially when we discussed about Spring modules, AOP module we learned theoretically aspect oriented programming, which is used to separate the primary logic and secondary logic. Now, if you see in our application, business logic and secondary logic is separated. Primary logic and secondary logic is separated by using this AOP. So in general, exception handling will mix with our logic in the Java. So wherever you have your logic, there only we will use exception handling keywords. But today, if you see in this application, our business logic is separate, exception handling logic is separate. This is aspect-oriented programming, which is used to separate primary logics and secondary logics. So our REST control is separate and exception handler is separate. REST controller is separate, exception handling logic is separate. So the process of separating primary logic and secondary logic is called aspect-oriented programming. We are using this AOP style of exception handling in our application. Good, fine. But as of now, whatever the exception is coming, we are sending that message directly. But in the real time, we should not send the message like this. In the real time, what we do is we will create one binding class for the exception, app exception info, something like this. New class app exception info class will be created. Inside this class, we are going to write some variables: private string exception code, private string exception message, private local date time, local date time exception date, something like this. When that exception occurred, what is the exception code? Okay, what is the exception message, and when that exception occurred, we are going to represent this information in one binding class. So as of now, what we are doing, we are directly returning whatever the exception occurred, that exception message we are returning directly. But in the real time, for every exception, we will set some code. We are going to set some code, right? So exception code will be available. Exception codes will be decided by our management guys. For every type of exception, they will assign one code. Something like, if it is a database exception, some code will be available. If it is Java exception, some code will be available. If it is web service exception, some code will be available. If it is a timeout exception, some code will be available. So for every type of exception, they will provide some code. That code we are going to set as part of this exception information, right? App exception info. I'm creating one binding class, right? Now, let me generate setters and getters for these variables. Let me generate setters and getters for these variables. Good. Exception code, exception message, exception date. In the app exception handler, currently we are returning string as a response. From now onwards, we don't return the string. We have created one binding class, which is app exception info. Now, let me create app exception info object. App exception info is equal to new app exception info, right? Next one, info dot set exception code. As I told you, for every exception, some code will be available. For example, if it is the SBI application, SBI exception, some 007, something like that, some code they will decide. If it is a database exception, 01. If it is Java side exception, 02. If it is web service exception, 03. If it is network exception, if it is a timeout exception, if it is a payment gateway exception, for every type of exception, they will assign one code. Currently, let me take it as 007. Now, exception message, info dot set exception message, e dot get message. Then info dot set exception date. Okay, local date time now. So at what date, when that exception occurred, we are going to represent. Now, this info we are going to send in the response body. So earlier we have written a string message directly to the consumer application. Whenever exception occurred, we return direct message as a response. But now we have created one binding class. In general, in the real time, when we are handling exceptions in the REST API, we are going to follow the same approach. In the real time, we are going to follow the same approach. So to represent exception information to the consumer, we will create one binding class. We will set exception data to that binding class object, and we will send that binding class object data to the consumer in the JSON format. Not only business data, even exception information also we will send to the consumer application in the JSON format. Not only business data, even exception information also we will send to the consumer application in the JSON format. Look at this, guys. Are you able to understand this method? Here I'm setting some random code. In the project, they will give you exception codes. For which type of exception, which code we need to use, they will give a sheet for us in the project. Based on that, we will set those details. Are you able to understand this method implementation? Customized exception pages we will display in the MVC application. If it is a web application, we will display custom error pages that we already discussed in the Spring Web MVC. So this is REST API. If you are developing UI based application, then whenever exception occurs, you can return the UI page so that some page will be displayed for the end user saying that some problem occurred, please try again after some time. But this is pure backend API. It is a REST API. In the REST API, UI pages will not be available. So whenever exception occurs, we need to send exception information to the consumer application in the JSON format. Let me run this project now. So whenever exception occurs in the entire application, this handler will be executed. In this handler, we are setting the data in the binding object and we are sending that binding object data to the consumer in the JSON format. Now send a request to the demo. Now you see here, this is how the exception information will come to the client. Status code is coming as a 500. 500 means it is a server problem. Then exception code, why exception occurred, that is exception message. When occurred, that exception date also we are sending in the response. Similarly, go to welcome/welcome, send that. Yes, exception code is coming, exception message is coming, and exception date is coming. Status code is coming as a 500. 500 nothing but internal server error. So when exception, if it is a success response, that will come in the JSON format. If it is exception also, the exception response also will come in the JSON format. In the real time microservices, I mean to say backend REST APIs, exception handling will be implemented like this. The exception will be sent to the consumer application in the JSON format with the proper status code. 500 means some problem occurred in the code. 500 means some problem occurred in the code. Are you clear with my point? And let us see how do we handle user-defined exception. Okay, let me create one exception, no user found exception. I'm creating one user-defined exception. So in the interview, they will ask you, how do you handle user-defined exceptions? Let me represent this as an exception, extends runtime exception, no user found exception. Okay, it will take a string message. Let me pass it to our super class message. Okay, can we call this as a exception class now? No user found exception is available. I have created one class, user defined exception class. So to represent this class as a user defined exception class, I'm extending the properties from runtime exception. Now let me create one more controller, new class, user REST controller. User REST controller, represent this as REST controller. Yeah, I'm writing one method, public string, something like this, public string get name by ID. So I'm taking integer user ID. So if user ID is less than or equal to 100, I will return the name as something like this. Okay, else I will throw some exception. Else throw new no user found exception invalid ID. Got it? So here, if you see, I'm writing one method. This method is available in my REST controller, and I am mapping this to the get request slash user slash UID. UID I'm expecting as a path variable. UID I'm expecting as a path variable. If UID is less than or equal to 100, I will return the response as Ashok. Otherwise, I'm throwing one user defined exception, invalid user ID. Something like this. Invalid user ID. So I'm throwing one user defined exception. Let us see what will happen. Run this application. Yeah, application started. Exception handler is available. App exception info. No user found exception is available. User REST controller. Slash welcome. For this, exception handler is working. 500 status code. Slash demo. Yes, for this also 500 status code is coming. The null pointer exception. Now let's go for /user/100. If I give user 100, username is coming as Ashok. It is working as expected. Success response 200 status code. Suppose if I give this ID as a 101, then what happened? That exception code is coming, invalid user ID is coming, and exception message is coming. But status code is coming as a 500. So what is the mean? Here it is a confusing for the consumer, right? 500 means server problem, but actually here it is a server problem or it is a client problem. Client is giving invalid ID. So what happened? For all types of exceptions, same method is getting executed. For all type of exceptions, same method is getting executed. Now, I want to write a different method for user-defined exception. So I want to execute this method for any type of exception. Whenever this user-defined exception occurred, I want to execute a different method. Let us write that. Handle user exception. Okay. So this should be executed when no user found exception occurred. This should be executed. For the no user found exception, I'm giving the code as 8. HTTP status, it is a bad request because it is a client problem. Now see, for user-defined exception, one handler method is available. For all type of other exceptions, one handler method is available. Status code here, if the no user found exception occurred, I want to execute this method and with the status code as bad request 400. If it is an arithmetic exception or if it is a null pointer exception, then it is an internal server error. 500 is the status code. Are you guys able to understand? Are you guys able to understand this one? This method will execute when user-defined exception occurred in the project. This method will execute when other exceptions occurred in the project. Okay. Now, user REST controller. If user ID is less than or equal to 100, I'm returning some name. I'm returning some name if condition satisfied. If condition not satisfied, I'm throwing user-defined exception. So based on the requirement, based on the situation, we will create user-defined exceptions also in our project. So this is no user found exception, no product found exception, no employee found exception. Like that, we can create some user-defined exceptions also based on the requirement. So here I have created one user-defined exception class, no user found exception, which is extending the properties from runtime exception. Okay. Then user REST controller, we have a method get name by ID. So user ID, if condition satisfied, it will return the name. If condition not satisfied, it will throw the exception. That's it. Now here in the exception handler class, we are having two methods. One method is responsible to handle user-defined exception. One method is responsible to handle predefined exception. Let us see what will happen now. Let me go to /welcome first. It will give /welcome will give what type of exception? If you see arithmetic exception. For arithmetic exception, is there any separate handler available? No. As there is no separate handler available for that, then this method will execute 007, internal server error will come. Now you see 007 internal server error is coming because for arithmetic exception, there is no specific handler. So it is going to generic exception handler method. Then go to demo REST controller method. It will give null pointer exception for that /demo. Now null pointer exception, for the null pointer exception also, there is no specific handler. So that's why this second method got executed. Generic exception handler method got executed. Then let's go to /user/123, which is above 100, right? Condition is not going to satisfy. If it is below 100, then only name will come. If it is above 100, then user-defined exception it will throw. See this one. When user-defined exception is occurred, status code is coming as 400 bad request because the client is giving invalid user ID. So we are saying that it is a bad request. When you send welcome, status code will come as 500. When you access welcome or demo, status code coming as 500. When you access user, status code is coming as 400. So like this, you can handle user defined exceptions also in our REST API. I created one user defined exception class, and I'm throwing that user defined exception when based on the situation. I'm throwing this user defined exception, and in the handler, I created one method to handle that user defined exception. How to handle user defined exceptions in our REST API. How to handle user defined exceptions in the REST API. So as we discussed, for every type of exception, one code will be available. Project management will decide the code. They will give an Excel sheet with the codes for which exception, which code we need to set. These are project will decide these codes. We created one binding class. That binding class is only to represent our exception information in the project. That's it. So REST controller advice annotation we are using for the global exception handling. One method to handle user defined exception. One method to handle all the predefined exceptions. If you can create multiple user defined exceptions and you can throw them and you can handle them in the same way. How I created no user found exception. Similarly, you can create no product found exception and you can throw that exception. For that exception also, you can write a method like same process. How I have done for one user defined exception, same process you can repeat for 10 user defined exceptions also. The process we are following for one user defined exception, same process you can follow for 10 user defined exceptions also. Is this clear for everyone? This is global exception handling. So we have seen how to handle predefined exceptions in our REST API and how to handle user defined exceptions in the REST API. You see, for predefined exception, arithmetic, null pointer, something like that. For them, I am giving the status code as 500. For user defined exception, invalid user ID, I'm giving the status code as 400, bad request. So based on the exception, we need to decide the status code and exception code also. Exception codes will be given by the project. The status codes we need to represent based on the type of the exception. If it is a code problem, we will say internal server error. If it is a client problem, we will say bad request. Yeah, good. Guys, anybody having any questions, you can unmute and you can ask me.
Sir, what is the difference between REST controller advice and controller advice?
Sir, controller advice means it is going to return view page. REST controller advice means whatever that you are returning, it will go as a response body directly. So I'm setting some object in the body, right? That object will be converted to JSON. That JSON data will go to the client as a response. REST controller advice means I want to return some UI page to display exception message. Some generic exception pages will be available, right? So if your application is having web pages, to display common error pages, we will go for controller advice. If your application is a REST API, then we use REST controller advice.
Okay, sir. For MVC, we can go for controller advice then.
Yeah. If you are using UI in the same project, then you will go for controller advice. If you are using only REST API, then we will go for REST controller advice.
Hello,
Good
sir.
morning,
Good
sir.
morning.
Naveen here.
Yes, sir. Tell me.
Sir, we can use normal try-catch block also to handle the exceptions, but the reason we are going for this approach is to imbibe this aspect-oriented programming pattern. Am I right, sir?
Sir, if you go for try-catch block approach, right? Whenever exception occurred, catch block will execute. Inside the catch block, again, you need to rethrow the exception. Then only this handler is going to execute, right?
Okay.
Yeah, the main intention here is if it is a web application, whatever the exception occurs, we will log that exception and we will display some generic error page for the customer saying that some problem occurred, please try again after some time. But here, when we are developing a REST API, some other application is going to access our REST API. So that means consumer will access our REST API. For that consumer, we need to convey the proper information regarding the exception. That's why we will follow this approach here.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, how it internally, going to that global exception handler, sir. Whenever the exception is occurring internally, how it is going?
Sir, that is AOP concept, sir. Whenever we write a class with the REST controller advice, right? So this
Okay.
is going to be getting executed whenever exception occurred, a event will be triggered. With that event, this REST controller advice class will be executed.
Okay, you mean any controller, any controller in
Yes.
the application, if you get an exception?
Not only in the controller, any class in the application. It can be a
Okay.
service class, it can be a DAO, it can be a normal util class, any class in the project, not only in the controller. If global exception handling means that entire
Oh.
application.
Okay. So if
So
the
in the
particular
whole
exception is
project.
not there, then it goes to exception
Correct.
class.
Correct.
Okay, super class. Okay.
In the entire project, any exception occurs, then it will go to the controller advice. This is a AOP programming because we are separating our business logic and secondary logic. So secondary logic, we can say here, exception handling logic is a secondary logic. We are not combining this logic with our primary logic.
Okay, that's what I mean. When to go for try catch blocks are there? I mean, if you want to write any
Try catch
individual.
block means whenever exception occurred here, the remaining logic is not getting executed, right? So even though after exception occurs, I want to continue the remaining logic, then you keep this line in the try catch block, and so that whenever exception occurs in the catch block, immediately it will eat the exception, the remaining logic also will get executed.
Okay. Okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Sir, what is super is doing in no user found exception class?
So basically, basically, whenever we create the object for this class, we are going to pass some parameter, right? Okay. So we are calling this constructor. For this constructor, we are passing some parameter. Internally, this is going to call runtime exception class construct. This class, this runtime exception is going to call exception class. That means we are passing the message. Whatever the message we are giving, we are passing that message to the exception class.
Okay.
So that message we can access in our handler. E.get message is there, right? Whatever the message we are passing there through constructor, that message we can access.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Sir, can we use both local and global exception in one project?
You can use both also, but if you want to use local exception handling, it will be difficult, right? If you have 10 controllers, in every controller, you need to write the exception handling. Global exception handling, you will write it one time, that will be used at all the classes. If you write local and global, First, it will check in the local. If it is available in the local, it will execute local exception handling method. If it is not available, then it will go for global exception handling.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Sir,
Yes.
we write a global exception we write a global REST controller advice. Then why are you using try and catch block, sir? Because the REST controller advice is for the global whole classes. So why are we use the try and catch block, sir?
So try and catch block means whenever exception occurred, I want to log that exception. Whenever try block having some problem, it will go to the catch block. Inside the catch block, we can write the logic to write that exception information to the log file. And after the catch block, if any logic is there, I want to continue that logic execution. Now, currently what is happening in my method, there are, let me go to this method. This method is available. There are some lines of code available. Whenever exception occurred here, the remaining logic will not get executed, right? Directly it will go to the handler. If I use a try catch block, then I can continue my logic execution. It depends on the situation. So
But
if you want to continue your method execution even after exception occurred, then you will use a try catch block.
Sir, but we write a REST controller advisor for the global. So why we need it, sir? My question to you, why we need it? Because global is cover the all the classes, sir.
That is what, sir. Whenever you go for global exception handling, this line exception occurred, it will go to the global exception handler. The remaining logic will not be executed, right? If you have the catch block, you will eat that exception. You will continue your execution. That is what I'm saying.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have one question. In
Yeah.
real time applications, generally user is coming with different data, right? At that
Correct.
time, sometimes it will, application flow will fail, and we used to see the logs. Which line is throwing the error? That information we used to see, and we used to debug, and we used to fix it, sir. If we follow in this approach, we are directly sending the e.get message, right? In that case, which line of code creating a problem and all, how we will come to know, sir?
Yeah, if you want to come to know that, you need to, instead of handling like this, you need to write the try catch block. In the catch block, you need to log the exception, then you need to rethrow the exception. Suppose this is the REST controller is available. If you want to understand that problem, then you need to go for the try catch blocks here.
Okay.
This
Instead of
line you
writing
need
it,
to,
instead of
yeah,
writing in every class, we will write it in only one class.
log file, you need to log exception. After logging that exception, it will go to the log. Then you need to rethrow the exception. Then it will store in the log file, and the global exception handler also will execute.
Okay.
Sir, actually industry follow which way is AOP way?
AOP way, sir, because AOP way is the recommended way, because we are separating our primary logics and secondary logic. Tomorrow, when you want to change the primary logic, secondary logic will not be affected.
Yes, sir. Okay. But sir, I want one more question asked to you. Sir, if we are not suppose in this page, we are not declaring any exception kind of word here. So how my exception class will know, because currently this page get welcome message is getting any kind of exception. Is it any internal process?
Internal process will be happening, sir. Whenever the exception occurred here, immediately it will check in the project, is there any handler available or not? So here handler is available. At the time of application startup, only boot will understand, is there any handlers available or not? So whenever exception occurs, immediately it will go to that handler.
Okay, that means REST controller advice have intelligence. If any
Yes.
application in any REST controller, any exception is occur, then it will directly redirect to this controller.
Yes, not only REST controller, any class in the project. It can be service, or it can be normal Java class, it can be controller. Any class, wherever exception occurs, then it will come to know that, yes, this exception occurred. For that exception, identify the method which is responsible to handle that particular exception.
Yes,
if that method is not available, then it will go for this global exception.
Yes, sir. Correct. Thank you, sir.
Sir, in global exception, how to debug, sir? Any exception occurs? How we know in this line this exception has occurred?
You can keep a breakpoint and you can debug. Na? If you
Sir,
keep a
sometimes
breakpoint, that you will understand.
the error code comes from the database. How
Sir,
do we
it
implement
depends.
that code?
It depends on situation, sir. In some projects, the exception codes will come from the database. In some projects, they will keep exception codes in the properties file. Okay, in my project, we are maintaining them in the properties file. So for DB exception, one code, for gateway exception, one code, for timeout exception, one code, for SQL exception, one code, for null pointer arithmetic Java exceptions, one code. The codes they will give, and we will keep them in our properties file.
So the code you have mentioned, like for example, SBI EX008,
Yeah, right.
that code is set up in database. That, I mean, how
You
do
can
set-
retrieve that, right? So whenever SQL exception, there will be some key. So there will be exception codes table will be available. So what is your code? What code you want? Suppose, for example, you want the code for the DB exception. Select star from table where key is equal to DB exception. Then you will get that code. You need to set that code here. So most of the projects, they will keep in the properties file, not in the database, because if you keep in the database unnecessarily, you need to execute the queries every time to get that code, which will reduce performance of the application, because these codes are static. They are not going to change in the future. It's better to keep in the properties file instead of database.
Thanks.
Sir, if
So
this
based on the
exception
application type, we are
occurs,
going
one
to
second.
change the procedure, right?
Sir, if the exception occurs in the service level or in like in database, how can we handle here?
I already told that point, madam. When you go for global exception handling, it's going to execute for exceptions occurred in any class, not only in the controller. Even if you get exception in the service class, also these methods will be executed.
Okay. So sometimes in our project also we call third party endpoint. If the third party is down, that also we can handle here.
Yes. Third party, if third party is down, you will get the exception in your program. Whenever exception occurs, then this handler will be executed.
So we need to customize here one exception for
Yes, you need to customize based on your project requirements. So as I told you here, I have given one method for exception.class, one method for no user found exception. Suppose if third party is down, then you will get gateway exception. So you can write one more method saying that gateway exception. So whenever gateway is failed, then this method is going to execute.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And guys,
Hello, sir. Hello.
1 minute. So from this batch, Prasad Mahakal got selected for the job. So Prasad, can you unmute your mic?
Yes, sir.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
So you got you have genuine experience, or you are a fresher?
No, sir. Actually, I was passed out in 2021. Then I maintained some of the fake experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got selected. Congratulations. How was your interview experience?
Yes, sir. Actually, the experience was nice. Whatever the question he asked me about the conceptual, right? You are means as you are getting chance in the for joining this morning class. Actually, I am the student of JRTP batch. But the way you are just telling about how the two REST controllers are communicating between them as a JSON content is there, then it will again convert into the object. The way I am explaining there, they got my point that he's very genuine person, and whatever the types of producer we are maintaining in our class, like web client is the REST template, then thin client. So such type of question they ask me, and initially they asked me about they are going to tell me that write one string and find with by using streams concept. You have to target character you have to find. So they asked me one question about regarding that also. Again, the Spring Profiles concept is there.
Yep, right.
Also, they are going to ask and how you can handle your own customized exception in your project.
Okay.
So the concept you have explained today, the same way I have explained there also.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Congratulations, man. So note down all the interview questions that you faced and share in the group.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, guys, next question.
Sir, for a
Based on
particular
the
method,
application type that we are
we
going to
have
develop,
One by one,
so
sir,
the
please.
procedure will change, right?
Sorry?
Based on the application type, like whether it is REST API or web application. So based on that, our exception
Handling
handling
logic will be
be
changed.
different.
Yes. So if it is REST API, as I have shown you here, exception, whenever exception occurs, we will send this kind of response to the client application. Because it is a REST API, there is no UI. If it is a UI based application, then whenever exception occurs, we'll display one error page saying that some problem occurred. Please try again after some time. It depends on type of the application we are building.
Okay. While handling the exception, there are a lot of exceptions will occur, right? So are we going to handle each and every exception?
Yes, sir. For every exception, one handler method we are going to write like this. So in general, in the projects, 10 to 15 types of different exceptions will be available. This arithmetic, null pointer, array index, out of bound, all those things comes under generic format. Project specific exceptions will be available like third party API is down, database server is down, cache is down, Kafka is down. Okay, timeout exceptions are occurring. Client side request, invalid request is coming from the client. So these 10 to 15 categories of exceptions will be available. For those exceptions, we will write the methods like this to handle.
This won't be a problem?
No.
Because there are a lot of exceptions, right?
That is what, sir. I have seen 10 to 15 types of exceptions in my project. So, I mean, you are thinking like for arithmetic exception, one method, for null pointer exception, one method, for index out of bound exception, one method. No, it's not like that.
Sir, but how we will know which line of code is throwing the exception? That is the only one question, sir. I mean,
Logger,
do we need
logger we will add, sir. When we add, I have shown you just now here with the try catch.
Yeah, try catch. Okay.
Yeah. So here you will log the exception. So whenever exception occurred will come to here. Here you will log the exception. Then immediately you will rethrow the exception.
The
Whenever you
customer,
rethrow,
okay.
then it will go to the handler.
Okay.
Then
Along
we
with
must
try
use
catch.
both try catch and
Handler
global
you
exception.
can use. Yes, if you want to log them, then you need to go with this approach.
Sir, in line number 15, we can write throw app exception handler.
Yes, you can do that. Not throw exception handler, sir. It is not an exception class. You need to throw the exception class. No user found exception you can throw.
So logger we are
We
calling
can't
as
throw.
one of the class, no, sir? Or we're creating the object for the logger. Instead of creating a particular class,
you can
can we
create the
create in
logger. You can create the logger here, logger.error method you can call to log the exception. In the logging, we will understand that process.
So in the global exception handler, you have the error object, right? There also we can print it, right? There also we can, in the starting of the first line, we can print the stack trace. After that, we can do whatever.
Here also
we want,
you
right?
can do the log. Here also.
Yeah, because we have a error object here.
Yes, you can do that. Here
But
because we
how do we know
got
that?
the error object.
Yeah, but how do we know the particular class or method here?
Here, the problem here is you will get only exception. You will not get from which class that exception is occurred. Yeah, that is the reason. First, we will log it, then we will rethrow that. Okay, good guys. Thank you. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll meet in the tomorrow session. So please practice this global exception handling with predefined exception as well as with the user defined exception. We'll meet in the tomorrow session. Have a great day.